What is up, 8th graders? This is numbers 6 through 11 for the SBAC prep. Please make sure you're taking down the notes so that you can get full credit on that guided notes that I handed out during class. Let's take a look at more questions that you could encounter this Tuesday. Number 6 here asks us to consider the lines shown on the graph. So we see we've got a graph and we've got a line. It says to enter the equation of the line in the form of y equals mx, where m is the slope. So what we need to remember here is our magical formula for every single line, y equals mx plus b. M always represented the slope for us, and b always represented our y-intercept. Now, one thing that we definitely can see for this line are finding both of these different values. So the first thing that I'm going to start to try and find is my slope. What we should remember is that slope is rise over run. Now, how we find rise over run is we pick 2 points on our line. It doesn't matter which two. I'm going to pick the easiest 2 points here. So I've got 1 point here and another point here on my line. Now, all I need to do is count the rise value over the run value. So how far I go up over how far I go over. So between these 2 points, it looks like I go up 5. So my rise number is 5 here. And my run number going over to that point is going to be 10. Now what we can see here is that this fraction can be reduced, and it can be reduced to 1 over 2. Now this is where you need to be super careful to answer the question that's given to you. A lot of people will say, hey, I'm done. I found the slope. Guess what? All I need to do is write 1/2 into that answer line and I am done. But remember, what it's asking you for is the actual equation. So what you got to remember to do is rewrite your equation with the slope you just found, which is your m value, along with that x, plus that b. Now there is no b there. Why? Because it crosses my y-intercept at this number 0 here. So you could put plus 0, but in this case plus 0 does not matter. The equation of your line is merely y equals 1/2 x. And that is this problem. Next problem here looks crazy, but one big thing that I do not want you to do on this test is get intimidated by things that look super complicated, because when you dissect them, they definitely turn into stuff that is much, much easier. So it says the expression is shown, and Martha evaluates the expression using the steps that are shown in steps 1, 2, and 3. Now it said for us that she made a mistake. Our job here is to double check on Martha's work and see where the mistake was made. So 2 things that we need to know here that we should remember from our exponents unit is that when we multiply 2 things with the same base, we add the exponents. The second thing that we also need to remember is that when we divide, we subtract the exponents. So I'm going to examine one small piece of this problem and see if the work that she has done checks out. So the piece that I'm going to examine is this little piece in here in the parentheses, and I'm going to ignore everything else because it looks like this is the only place that she could have made a silly mistake here. So if I were to have k to the 6 all over k to the 4th times k to the 3rd, I can simplify the bottom by just adding those exponents. So just as the rules state above, I take the 2 exponents down below, I add 4 and 3 together, and I get 7. Now it looks like this step checks out, step number 1 checks out, so it can't be step number 1. Let's see if step number 2 checks out. If I were to use the rule above again, since I'm dividing, I'm going to subtract my 2 exponents, so I'm going to subtract 6 from 7 here. I would get k to the -1 power because all I did was subtract 6 minus 7 to get k to the -1st. Looks like step number 2 also checks out here. So here's where I can use process of elimination to better my chances to find my answer. Steps 2 is correct, so it can't be A or B. So it must be step 3 where she made a silly mistake. So what I can see that she did here is she has j to the second, k to the negative first, all to the negative third power. Now this is where you need to understand one separate rule about exponents, is if you have a parenthesis separating them, you don't add or subtract them, you multiply. So what the final answer should have looked like is j to the second, k to the positive 3, because that's what negative 1 times negative 3 would give me. So the mistake was made in step number 3, and the correct answer should have been D here. Now, even if you lost me on that last step, we can all agree that process of elimination will allow you to make your chances better in answering super complicated questions by just taking it piece by piece. Number 8 requires us to go back to our whole line unit, and in this case it says this graph shows a proportional relationship between the distance traveled by Tim on a road trip and the number of hours for which he traveled, and it gives us a nice graph here. It asks us which statement correctly identifies the slope and correctly interprets the slope for the situation. So it looks like what I'm looking for, plain and simple, is the slope of this line. Now if you remember from a couple of examples ago, slope is nothing more than rise over run. So if I look at the line that they give me, I'm going to pick 2 points, and luckily they marked 2 points, a bunch of points for me. So if I pick 2 points, I can figure out what my slope is. So if I pick these 2 points that I'm highlighting in green, my rise value, so if I go from 50 to 100 here, I go up 50. And if I go over from 1 to 2, all I'm doing is I'm going over 1. So my slope here is 50 over 1. Now again, using process of elimination here, just by finding the slope, you now know that C and D can't be your answer because it doesn't even have the right slope value. So now we read through the answers. A says the slope of the line is 50 over 1, so the distance traveled by Tim is 50 miles every hour. The second one says the slope of the line is 50 over 1, so same slope, but the interpretation is that the distance traveled by Tim is 1 mile every 50 hours. Now here's where you need to be smart about your labels here. Now 50 in the rise over run value does not represent hours, it represents miles here. So the correct interpretation would be A, because it gives us the correct interpretation of that fraction. So it's 50 miles for every 1 hour. And there is a very straightforward slope question in which you need to find the slope between 2 points. So we've got our best friend, the true or false questions here. And in this problem, it says a leaf falls 18 feet from a branch to the ground at a rate of 5 feet every 2 seconds. It asks us to determine whether each statement about the leaf is true. It says select true or false for each statement. Now here is where drawing a picture is massively important. So I'm going to write up top, picture with exclamation points here, because it asks you about a scenario that would be much easier to visualize if you had a little picture here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a little leaf. Look at my beautiful leaf there. And what I know is that it tells me that this leaf is 18 feet from the ground, and what it's doing is that every 2 seconds it is falling 5 feet lower and lower. So now that I've got my scenario written out, all I need to do is go through each of the statements that they give me and ask myself whether it's a true statement according to my picture. So the first statement says the initial height of the leaf is 18 feet. What I can see here, according to my picture, this leaf is definitely 18 feet from the ground. So this is a true statement. The second one says the leaf falls at a rate of 2 1/5 foot every 1 second. So this is where I need to use some critical thinking skills. If I know that the leaf falls 5 feet in 2 seconds, in 1 second, I know it's just half of that distance, which is 2.5. Now what I know for a fact is that 2.5 ain't anywhere close to 2 over 5, because 2 over 5 is less than 1 and 2.5 is definitely bigger than 1. So this would be a false statement. The next one says the leaf is 3 feet above the ground after 6 seconds. So let's continue our path here. If this leaf continues to fall at the same rate, which is 5 feet every 2 seconds, after 6 seconds, it has fallen a total of 15 feet. Now all we need to consider is that if it's fallen 15 feet and it started at 18, how many feet does it have left to fall? You guessed it, it's got 3 feet left to fall. So just by using the picture, we can see that this is a true statement because we can reason our way through this type of problem if we were able to draw a picture. So definitely draw a picture when it helps you the most. Problem number 10 here is one of those intimidation problems again. Looks super complicated, but let's see what it's really trying to ask us. Sally is solving the linear equation that's stated here. Her final 2 steps are those that you can read yourself, and it says to select the statement that correctly interprets Sally's solution. Now, what you should see here, notice that we encountered situations like this at the beginning of the year. Remember, these were called special cases. And this happened when our x's canceled out and we were left with 2 numbers at the very end when we were solving equations. Now, what you should remember about this statement is that if these 2 numbers are not equal, we encounter a very special solution. So the solution isn't given to us here. It's either a no solution problem or an infinitely many solutions problem. So we've got a 50-50 shot of getting the correct answer here because we know that the solution that we get at the end means we're in our special case. So since these numbers are not equal to each other, C is the correct answer here because this means that it is a no solution problem. The only time that we get infinitely many solutions is if I get a true statement like 4 equals 4 or 7 equals 7, which is not the case for this problem. So this required no math, just knowledge of what it means when you get a special case in solving equations. All right, so last but not least, we've got number 11 here in this set. And it asks us which table of values can be defined by that function y equals 4x minus 2. Now this boils down to nothing more, nothing less than just substitution. Now what you're substituting are the x and y values to see which ones make a true statement. Now, before you start groaning and saying, oh man, that's a lot of things to plug in, always choose the easiest numbers to plug in. The easiest number ever to plug in is always going to be 0. So where I see in my first answer, that possibility answer, is that there's a 0 and a -2 that I can plug into my equation. So when I plug this in, so wherever I see a y, I'm going to plug in -2, and wherever I see an x, I'm going to plug in a 0 here. So notice all I did was I plugged in that 1 point to that top equation. What I should see is that 4 times 0 gives me 0, which cancels out, and I'm left with a statement that says 2 is equal to -2. That checks out. Guess what? A is a possibility answer. I'm going to put a question mark next to it just in case I need to check more points. But let's cross out some answers here. Letter B, I'm going to plug in another 0 point. In this case, when I plug in x and y goes in for 4 here, and 0 again goes in for x, and let's see if I get a true statement. 4 times 0 just gives me 0, so that cancels out. And I get 4 is equal to -2. That is not a true statement. Therefore, this table cannot represent my answer. I spy with my little eye another easy point to plug in. That's 0 and 2. So y is 2 and x is 0. So wherever I see an x, I plug in a 0 here. Now, once I get this particular one solved, I know that 4 times 0, like in the last 3 examples, cancels out. And I'm left with 2 is equal to -2. Not a true statement, so it can't be this particular table. Now, I'm going to plug in one more point for C just to see if it works out. So I'm going to plug in the easiest point that I can see, 2, 1. So I'm going to plug in 2 for x and 1 for y. So 1 goes where y is, 2 goes where x is, and let's see if this one works out. So I get 1 is equal to 4 times 2, which is 8, minus 2, and we can already see that it does not work out. So my correct answer was A. Now realize that this work was shortened tremendously just by looking at which points were the easiest to plug in. So make sure you're aware about how you can make these problems much easier than what they initially look like just by using your critical thinking skills. To the end of this specific review, please stay tuned and subscribe for more. You will be getting more and more prep as we move forward. Just make sure you gain that confidence and just keep on going. So Emily, can you tell them Keep going and do your work. Say keep going and do your work. Look at Emily. Emily, say keep going and do your work.
Going.
And do your work.
And do work.
Yeah. Say bye.